Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in again for another brew guide video. This is a fairly recognizable coffee brewer that you've probably seen in cafes, and I bet a lot of you have at home. It's a very beloved brewer of choice by a lot of people around the world, called the Hario V60. But really this guide is going to be about any kind of pour over coffee you want to make. There are subtle differences between the Hario V60 and the Kalita Wave and Melitta beehive dripper. Essentially, they all are some kind of housing for a filter paper that you're going to add coffee to and drip water through. So this is more for a sort of school of brewing than this particular brewer that I want to talk about today. There are a few things you might want to be aware of that will allow you to tweak your recipe to really maximize flavor in the cup. For instance, knowing the type of filter paper you're going to use, the type of material your brewer is made of, and obviously the coffee you have to brew. So we're going to put 18 grams of coffee into the cone once you've rinsed the filter paper. Make a little divot. And I like to put a little hole in the middle of the grounds just to avoid water dripping across the top of the bed and down the side of the filter brewer straight away. So it just helps to evenly bloom the grounds a little bit. I've then added some just boiled water, about 60 grams or so, and I'm going to give it a really nice stir with the smallest spoon I own. I find if you've got something really delicate and tiny, you can really eke it into those little dry pockets and avoid leaving clumps that will sort of bubble up when you begin pouring over after the bloom phase. That's that done. 30 or 40 seconds or so is all you really need for it to soak the grounds and get them all degassed and ready to extract when we now pour over with fresh water. So that's 40 seconds. And I tend to just pour in a thin stream, aiming for any dark patches that might rise up or any pockets if I didn't do that quite right. And because this is a 2-cup brewer, but I'm only brewing a single cup, I'm kind of going to leave the level of the water around halfway up here and just keep topping up with fresh water as I go. That way I'll sort of keep rinsing the grounds with fresh solvent, in the water is the solvent here for our extraction, and slowly rinse out the flavor as we go. And I want to aim for about 300 grams of water to my 18 grams of coffee. That's a very normal ratio to use if you want sort of a normal strength cup of coffee. If you're not really getting enough intensity from your beans, there are things you can try, like grinding finer, using slightly hotter water. But ultimately, if you want to have more coffee flavor, you can use a higher dose. Or if it's a little bit too intense for you at this ratio, you can also drop it down. And I find with coffees like from Kenya, for example, where there's a lot of acidity and a lot of intensity, you can reduce to sort of 55 to 58 grams per liter, and they can be delicious. Whereas maybe South American coffee, like from Peru, for example, I might use 65 grams per liter if I want a bit more intensity of character. This Ecuadorian coffee from Jorge Tapia is relatively intense, has a lot of traits that remind me of Ethiopian coffees in a way, and it's very floral and very citric. And I'm going to stick to 18 to 300 grams for this brew. My water is as hot as it could be. Whilst doing a video, it might sit for a minute longer than I would wish, but it's still definitely hot enough to make a nice brew, even with a ceramic cone like this, where it pulls a lot of the heat out of the brew water. As you rinse the filter paper, you will warm it up a little bit. But if you want to brew very, very hot, I would recommend buying a plastic brewer or something made of glass or steel, something very, very thin. But this is completely fine to use ceramic as well. These might carry less of a flavor taint as well if you forget and leave your paper filter in there with the grounds. It seems to be easier to keep ceramic cones completely free of any flavor taint, whereas plastic can, over time, start to absorb a bit of coffee flavor. You might need to use some cleaner every now and then, designed for coffee oils and tannins. So we're about 3 minutes. I'm just coming up to 300 grams. That's kind of what I like to be. And this is now a good time to see how my grind was set, because if I give it a little mix to avoid anything getting stuck on the side, it should slowly drip through and leave a nice flat bed in around 30 seconds or so. If it takes a lot longer than that, it's telling you that maybe your grind was a little fine, a little too granular, and there's a lot of resistance for the water to flow through. Your extraction time will be quite high, and it means you might find a little bit more sort of bitter or stewed characteristics in the cup. If it's too coarse and you're finding you're having to keep topping up to get the level there, and it drains through very quickly in 10, 15 seconds or so, you would want to fine up your grind a little bit. And I always sort of recommend starting at a caster sugar-like consistency for your grind with most brewers. And from there, just making subtle changes, finer or coarser, depending on how it behaves in the cone and how it tastes. We're going to go back to our spoon, get a little white. Once I'm fully drawn through on the bed, which is just about now at 4 minutes on the clock, I can remove the cone and give the brew a little stir as well. Especially with pour-over coffee, this is quite important to homogenize the coffee. You might find it comes out a little bit layered, otherwise quite strong at the bottom and quite weak at the top. So if you're brewing into a carafe to pour into 2 cups, it's especially important. If it's just yours, you can choose whether to stir on it, but I like to have it all mixed up. It smells super good. So I used filtered water to make this brew. I'd recommend doing that, especially if your water is quite hard or high in alkalinity, which is the sort of water's capacity to buffer acidity and mute certain characteristics in coffee. Bottled water is pretty extravagant. I wouldn't necessarily buy water to brew with, but when we're out of lockdown, I would definitely recommend going to your favorite coffee shop where they're likely treating their water well, and ask if you can take a little bit home to brew the beans that you're probably buying from them anyway. If they give you a funny look, make sure you put a nice healthy tip in the tip jar and explain that you're just trying to get the best from the coffee you're brewing at home. It's very tasty. It's very, very hot, so it's hard to tell right now. But it's very, very sweet, actually. The finish is really, really nice. And I'm a huge fan of that kind of floral citric character that you get. The variety at play in this particular coffee seems to be in part responsible for that. It's a Typico Mejorado, which is actually not a Typico at all. It's a Bourbon and Geisha cross variety, widely planted in the north of Ecuador. I think there was a research facility run by Nestle where some workers smuggled seeds out, sort of gave them to people, and because of their hardiness in the field, they called it Typico Mejorado, because compared to the spindly Typica trees, they looked really, really good. But the actual genetics are not from Typica. So this is really, really tasty. And like I say, any kind of pour-over will give you the same kind of results. If you're clarifying through a paper filter, the mouthfeel is very, very clear and clean. There's no silt or anything like that. And you can do a few different things to accentuate different notes in the coffee. If you want higher acidity, you might want to grind a little coarser. If you want more bittersweet, fuller cup, grinding a little bit finer will help you achieve that. Personally, I like to use the V60 because I can keep the papers flat, whereas with a Kalita, I find that I crumple the papers quite easily and struggle to rinse them without them collapsing. So it's purely a little bit of laziness on my part that I favor the V60. But again, you will get slightly different traits depending on how the brewer allows the water to drain through the bed. A very flat bed with a different flow rate might give you a slightly different character than a conical shape like the V60. So do experiment and have fun brewing your coffee. And as you taste it and think about how the flavors are, think now about changing your grinder for the next one. So if it's a little bit too bitter for you, make the notch coarser now so that next time you go to brew your coffee, you don't have to remember how things were. Similarly, if it's a little thin, a little sour, take a little bit finer, or maybe try brewing with slightly hotter water. Give it a little flash on the hob before brewing, just to make sure it's really, really hot, especially brewing in something like ceramic. I'm a super big fan of it, so I'm going to enjoy this coffee, and I hope you do too. Please email us at betterbrewing@workshopcoffee.com if you have specific inquiries about your home brewing setup and you want some advice on getting the best out of your beans with what you've got available right now. So take care and see you soon.